What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Fat Boys Dynasty Podcast, coming at you live. I am Bo. No Brant you can see this week, so that means I have been left completely unattended. Shout out to the Fantasy Holics Podcast Network for putting the show together. So I thought it was imperative that even though Brant's schedules and my schedules didn't really align for us to do a show together this week after last week's episode, I thought it was imperative that something got put out this week with it being Combine Week. So I'm going to keep this a super short episode. Thursday, obviously, we get the defensive linemen and the linebackers. If you're a fan of the Atlanta Falcons like me, this is the day that you're going to tune in the most because our team desperately needs pass rush. On Friday, you have some defensive backs and tight ends, some very exciting fantasy players there with Tyler Warren and Colton Lovelace. Both of those guys I don't think are going to compete. And then Saturday, we have quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, and then wrapping up with the offensive linemen on Sunday. So I think it's imperative that we first discuss the NFL Combine for what it is, right? What it is a glorified audition, of for these college players to come out, try to move up the board a little bit, get to meet some teams and some executives and coaching staff from respective teams. They get to, I think each team gets to do something like 45 interviews with players at the Combine. But also in recent years, it's been, we've seen more of the quote unquote stars at each position kind of say, hey, listen, I don't have a whole lot to gain from competing. I only stand to lose. That's why we see guys like, Tyler Warren at the tight end position, Ashton Genty and Shadur Sanders come out and say they're not going to participate. They're going to go talk to teams, interview, but they're not going to put their skills to, on display. They're going to go do it in a controlled environment. Like Shadur has already said, he's going to throw at the Colorado Pro Day to Colorado wide receivers, guys he's comfortable with, where things are less likely to go wrong and cost yourself money. On the flip side of that, though, we have a lot of guys that are going to go out and try to get some more money, right? So let's start with this quarterback position or quarterback grouping, I guess, because even in years past where we've looked at a quarterback class and said, yeah, this class isn't that great. The one that comes to most recent memory is, of course, the, Desmond Ridder, Malik Willis quarterback class, where really Brock Purdy was the shining star out of that class, and the rest was kind of all just not great, obviously, right? But this class, I feel, is very similar, as it's got some top-end guys that people say aren't franchise quarterbacks necessarily, but they are potential all-star Pro Bowl level players, and Shadur Sanders and Cam Ward. And then you've even had some people mention, Jackson Dart. But I think there's a couple other guys that really stand to benefit in this this Combine weekend and interviewing and getting their time in with some of these coaching staffs. So the first one that comes to mind is Quinn Ewers. Missed some time with injury, obviously, at the University of Texas. The season wasn't exactly what Texas thought it was going to be this year. Some bright spots, some down spots. Quinn Ewers would have liked to have had a better, campaign to dust off and right into the NFL. But 3,472 yards passing, 31 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. It was just an okay season for Quinn. But I think Quinn Ewers has a chance to potentially cement himself into that 4th, 5th, 6th best quarterback range, which is really where I think all of these guys could go. That I'm going to talk about. The next one's Kyle McCord from Syracuse, formerly of Ohio State. 4,779 yards passing, which is electric, 34 touchdowns to go along with 12 interceptions as well. Obviously the big red flag is in the ACC, you play a little lesser competition. It was down here for Florida State, obviously down here for Clemson, last couple of years for Clemson. So obviously competition's not what it would have been if Kyle would have stayed at, Ohio State and potentially competed there. But again, I think this is a guy that stands to, potentially move up along with the last one here. I'll get him out and then I'll put my reasoning about it. Jalen Milroe of Alabama. Again, this one, kind of self-explanatory, didn't live up to what it was the expectations this year in Alabama. 2,844 yards passing, 16 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. But he did add those 20 rushing touchdowns, which definitely is going to be appealing to the NFL. However, I wonder how many people are going to be scared off, NFL execs, I guess, are going to be scared of him because he's very similar inability to Anthony Richardson. Does kind of have that big arm, that big frame that really translates well to rushing, but doesn't look that great passing. But anyway, what I was getting at is this quarterback room. I think, again, you're going to have a lot of people jockeying for that Shadur, Cam Ward, top or higher end quarterbacks. And then I think we're going to see is a lot of these teams that miss out on those guys, maybe in a second round, back half of the first, try to get one of these other quarterbacks. Maybe they didn't like as much as those guys, but they could see being a quarterback that, gives them a chance every year. If you look at the NFL as a whole, and I'm not going to spend a bunch of time throwing out a bunch of names, but, you look at guys like Dak Prescott, right? Granted, he's had some injury concerns, but he was taken in the third or fourth round, and he makes that Cowboys offense scary every single time they play. Yes, he costs them some games, and you could make all kinds of arguments about it. But at the end of the day, the Cowboys have that quarterback position figured out, right? So Brock Purdy again in San Francisco with the 7th round, Tom Brady obviously way back. But again, I digress. Sometimes these quarterbacks don't happen in the first round that end up hitting. And so I think there's a lot of quarterbacks that stand to make some money this week. Another position, obviously, I'm going to go through all 4 major positions for fantasy where we could see some, moving and shaking is the running back position, right? If one of these guys comes out and has better hands than we thought, or runs a faster 40 time than we were expecting or something, you're going to see these guys shoot around a little bit. So 3 guys I'm kind of keeping my eye on are Brashad Smith from SMU. This year he had 1,659 total yards to go along with 18 touchdowns. For an SMU program that's really on the way back up finally. I think it's been a long time for SMU, so that's exciting. My favorite player to keep an eye on in this draft, which I have one at the running back position and the wide receiver position, is Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State. This guy was coming into the season off of a monster campaign in 2023 where he had 22 total touchdowns, 2,700 total yards, just a massive season for Oklahoma State. This year was obviously very disappointing. Just over 1,000 yards total, 1,059 yards total between running and catching. And then he did have 14 touchdowns. So definitely a down year for Ollie Gordon. But this is one that I think if he has a decent showing at the NFL Combine, this is a player that I think is going to skyrocket up some fantasy drafts. For those of you that draft, right after the NFL draft takes place, really before training camps and things like that. I think Ollie Gordon is a name that's going to skyrocket depending on how he does at this combine. And I think we will be pleasantly surprised. The last running back I've got is DJ Giddens out of Kansas State. This is another player that when he gets the ball in his hands, he's very electric. Didn't have the, overwhelming amount of touches his entire career. So that may be something but I do kind of get a similarity of I know their body size is a little different, but Bucky Irving here, Devon A-Chain, very electric when he gets the ball, 1,601 yards, 8 touchdowns. So again, this is a player that can make plays, and I'm very excited to see. Giddens, I think, is one that could, with the cone drill and the 40-yard dash, make himself a decent amount of money here. So definitely 3 guys I'm keeping my eye on there in the running back market. However, I think the biggest for fantasy admirations, I think the wide receiver pool is probably the spot where you'll see the most moving and shaking. There's a lot of conversation about, Ted McMillan and Luther Burden being the top of the class. Most people have Emeka Ibuka from, I think I said that right, from Ohio State. Wish Brant was here. I could have let him have that one. It would have been a lot better than mine. But I think a lot of people have him as 3rd. And then it's kind of a crapshoot. It's your personal preference. And obviously, draft spot and draft number is going to mean something with these wide receivers. And kind of like what we saw with Xavier Worthy last year, where he just blew everybody out of the water at the 40 time, made himself, a lot of money with that. And then he kind of came into his own there at the end of the season, even though, Brant and I weren't the biggest Xavier Worthy fans. He kind of got there. But here's 3 wide receivers. I'm going to start with 2 that I think are okay, or that will be okay, make themselves some money. And then the guy that I'm pulling for the most. So Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State is number 1. In this last season, 2024, had 87 receptions, 1,183 yards, 9 touchdowns. Again, a focal point of that Iowa State offense. They wanted the ball in his hands. and just had a natural route tree that I think translates very well to the NFL. The speed is pretty good. It's not overwhelming, but I think he's got a route tree that he's going to shake some defenders loose on and be able to immediately translate to the NFL. I want to see how he does on the combine. If he's got, at least average speed and average, drills and whatnot. I think this is another player that will move up fantasy boards as we get closer. I felt like I had to talk about Isaiah Bond out of Texas. He did transfer into Texas this year. Another name that a lot of people were looking to have a really good season in Texas, who was kind of underwhelming. 34 receptions, 540 yards, 5 touchdowns. He did add 4 carries for 98 yards rushing and a touchdown, which I thought was interesting. I think it does also, kind of highlight his elusiveness to an extent. But I think Isaiah Bond's another one that really stands to move up the draft boards with a strong showing. And then again, my favorite one from this group here is Theo Weiss Jr. out of Mizzou. As a Mizzou fan, I did watch more Mizzou than I did anybody else. So there's some SEC overlap, obviously. But Theo Weiss transferred into Mizzou a couple seasons back from Oklahoma. Obviously was overshown by Luther Burden Jr., but put together a very good year. Missed the last game of the season, so I think that's really what kept him from the 1,000-yard mark. But 60 receptions, 884 total yards, and 4 touchdowns. Again, it was a down year for Luther Burden compared to the year prior. It also was for Theo Weiss. But when you're playing second fiddle to a guy like that and you can still put numbers up like this, I think it really is indicative of the player. And I do think Theo Weiss is the type of guy who'll never be a number 1 in an NFL offense, but I think he could come in and really be a strong 2 for somebody, which obviously we all know translates very well to fantasy success as long as there's enough passes out there. So Theo Weiss is one that I'm going to keep my eye on and see how he does in the combine. I think, again, there is a lot of moving and shaking that's going to take place in not just the wide receiver room, all these groupings. As the combine happens, we'll start getting our favorites, and the draft will happen, and it'll change some things up again. For those of you that are in the dynasty landscape and multiple leagues and doing this year round, getting excited about the combine, obviously you're doing your own research. I think it's imperative to remember too that just if you fall in love with a player, the landing spot doesn't have to be the best for them to eventually have relevancy. A lot of us, myself included, I was a huge Bucky Irving fan about this time last year. Fell to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, yes, his name's going to elude me now. Rachaad White, his efficiency metrics were really low, but he still was a bell cow usage-wise. In Tampa, I thought it'd be a lot of hard work to get a Bucky Irving a role, and I didn't really touch him anywhere. I didn't draft him in many places just because I wasn't in a position where it would either been a reach for me or he would have had to fall way later than he should have. But he ended up scratching and clawing into that backfield really early and kind of taking it over there down the stretch. So again, there's hope for all of these guys. So again, do your research on these players yourself. Watch the combine, look at numbers from the combine, see who stands out and what you like. Okay. Last position I think is imperative to talk about, because inevitably one of these guys is going to have some relevancy someplace in the tight end world. Maybe not one of these guys, but outside of the top 2. So I'm going to highlight 3 that I kind of like. Elijah Arroyo out of Miami. I think this guy should be in the conversation for top 3. In my opinion, I think he does fall behind the other 2 a decent amount, but I think he should be up there. 35 receptions this year, 590 yards, 7 touchdowns, got a knack for the end zone, got a knack for finding himself open, in goal to go situations. I think he's going to be a very prototypical tight end that the NFL likes. Terrence Ferguson of Oregon. Again, when you think Oregon, tight end isn't necessarily the position that jumps out at you. And I think they might be starting to change that a little bit more with this. 43 receptions for Terrence, 591 yards receiving to go along with 3 touchdowns. And the last one, again, this one's more for Brant than it is myself, because if Brant was here, I know he would do this. because Brandt's thing with tight ends. If they go to the University of Iowa and they come out and they get drafted in the NFL, that's your guy because they always hit. Is Luke Lachey out of Iowa, 28 receptions, 231 yards, 0 touchdowns. Doesn't sound great, not that great. We all know Iowa's not necessarily a passing first team. Caleb Johnson was the guy there out of the backfield. But we do know one thing about Luke that is sometimes hard to teach, as the Falcons fans have seen with Kyle Pitts, is blocking. We know Luke's going to be able to block. So it'll be really interesting to see what he does in those individual drills this week, and see if he can't move himself up into the fantasy conversations. He's probably not there right now, but definitely interesting to see. And it will be interesting to talk about this again next week. Because Brandt and I did do an after discussion on the NFL Combine last year, and the big focus obviously was Xavier Worthy. And I remember Brandt and I both being like, yeah, it's cute, it's gimmicky, but the size, I don't know if it translates. And then I know Brandt and I had very similar sentiments after the NFL draft where, the Kansas City Chiefs came up and got him, and it was like, this player feels really gimmicky. But if there's anybody who could use a gimmicky player, right, it's Andy Reid. And then the first game of the season, right, he had 3 touches for 2 touchdowns and a bunch of fantasy yards. So it's definitely going to be really interesting to see, kind of the fallout of the NFL Combine. For those of us that are degenerates like myself, like Brandt, like a lot of you that tune in and listen, this weekend is definitely a precursor to things to come, and it definitely gets some of the creative juices and some of the player love have to get shares of this guy kind of start this weekend. So I hope you guys all tune in, watch the Combine a little bit, start doing some research on players. I know Brandt and I are going to discuss it on next week's episode, probably to an extent. I know we want to get in and talk about coaching changes in the NFL and what that means for their teams and their fantasy players. But definitely going to be doing some discussing on the Combine. Definitely going to be, paying attention and watching that ourselves. It'll be interesting to see if the Fantasy Holics have any representatives there. We've had some in the past. So that'll definitely be interesting to see if anybody makes it out there. But as always, guys, I just wanted to get a sweet little episode out to you guys, even though Brandt wasn't here, kind of just touch base, make sure we're getting back into the groove of things, because Brandt and I did have some time off there for the playoffs, the Super Bowl, and want to be able to put content out for you guys all off season and kind of keep you in the groove with the Fat Boys, so to speak, kind of see what we're thinking and compare it to yourselves. So as always, thanks for tuning in, guys, and stay hungry and stay fat, my friends.